Matt, what we have learned is that life under Russian occupation is one of unremitting misery. Now, General Minakayev, you mentioned what he just said today. He's not a very senior Russian general, but still he's in charge of propaganda in the central region of Russia. And what he was saying was that they want to extend to Transnistria. That's part of Moldova, which is another independent state like Ukraine, even though Transnistria comes under Russian control. What's that about? It's about denying Ukraine access to the sea. In effect, Ukraine can't export through the Black Sea already because Russia has blockaded it. But it's another threat. It increases anxiety. We have spoken to people in those cities which have been occupied from right at the beginning of the war, right back to February. Now, as we know, the violence is at its worst in Mariupol. These cities are all around that. Our report today starts in Mariupol. And the images from the very start, some viewers may find distressing. They're clearing the bodies in Mariupol. Old people who died of hunger and thirst in their apartments. Or maybe they were hit by shrapnel. How many dead? Are the Russians counting? They own these streets now, these ruins they've created, this catastrophe. And where will they take the casualties of their campaign to conquer Ukraine? Satellite photographs show what look like new mass graves next to the cemetery in Manhush, 12 miles away. Big enough for 9,000 corpses, say the Ukrainians. We met Vasil, who'd just fled Manhush. He said he didn't know about the graves, but that the Russians have started to screen males above 14, his son's age.
Обязательно фильтрация. Кто прошел, тот на разбирать эти, город Мариуполь, там вот это все развалины, а кто не прошел, тюрьму и до выяснения обстоятельств. Из-за этого пришлось.
He sneaked his family out by back roads, knowing it was the only way to escape. Those who've just arrived in Zaporizhia provide a glimpse into life in the cities Russia controls in southern Ukraine. We didn't hear about the kind of atrocities uncovered in Bucha and other towns near Kyiv, but fear is everywhere. In Tokmak back in March, people held protests as Russian snipers looked down from the roof of the city hall. I learned from Serhiy that Russian justice in Tokmak is swift and brutal.
Проверяют документы, нет документов, комендатуру, лупят, потом держат это самое, 3-4 дня заставляют подметать город, работы какие-то делать. Ну и я знаю, ну как относится, ну как, телефоны тоже проверяют постоянно. Хорошего ничего нет. Вообще ничего.
Это русские там или чеченцы, или как они себя ведут?
Serhiy and his family left now because there's no work, no medicines, no way of getting cash, and because they were afraid.
На велосипеде ехал, застрелили, второго танком переехали, начало, самое начало. Сейчас, я же говорю, что ищут, кто был, работал в исполкоме и уехал, кто работал там туда-сюда, где-то в милиции и так далее, кто уехал, скрывают квартиры, болгаркой вырезают и так далее.
When the war started, people from Dniprorudne stood in the way of the Russian armor. They saw off one tank, but their success didn't last. For Christina and her friends, life under occupation is one of grinding, everyday terror.
Нашего знакомого, он пытался выехать просто с сельского района, Его забрали деньги. Только он спросил, почему это сделали. Его избили. 3 дня держали.
And what was it that made you decide to leave in the end after you've stayed until now?
Дети. Ну, потому что... Ну, а куда? И не хотелось уезжать, потому что там же остались наши остальные родственники. Ну, прежде всего, это дети. Хочется жить просто.
Artem is 8 and Matvey 4. To them, the trip is fun, an adventure. They don't understand that their parents have had to leave everything behind. But at least they won't grow up under Russian occupation, in constant fear.
Lindsay Hilson reporting. Well, earlier I spoke to Fiona Hill, the former senior US National Security Advisor on Russia for Presidents Bush, Obama and Trump, who's written a new book about her journey from the north of England to the White House, drawing parallels between forgotten communities in America and indeed in modern Russia. I began asking her what she thinks Vladimir Putin's war aims are right now.
Well, it's very clear that he intends to consolidate as much territory as possible, and then, potentially having taught Ukraine, the West, United States, Europe, you name it, some kind of lesson about how ruthless he can be and how brutal he can be. I suspect that what he'll do is declare a kind of sort of victory for the moment, and then use that as a way of regrouping, potentially for a further offensive. And I think that is kind of the dilemma that we face. And, of course, he may actually, kind of get right on with it immediately after declaring victory. I mean, a lot of people are focused on the fact that May 9th, traditionally in Russia, is Victory Day. It's the day of the celebration of the Soviet victory, along with, of course, the West over Nazi Germany in World War II. And Putin, obviously, every year wants to show something significant in terms of his accomplishments. And given this special military operation, aka a war in Ukraine, will want to make some kind of commemoration about the excellent performance of the Russian military and, of course, of himself. There will be military parades and other commemorations there.
But what you're saying, Fiona, is that you don't think that the 9th of May is necessarily an end point for him to celebrate?
No, look, it looks very suspiciously like what we saw with George W. Bush during the conflict in Iraq, the infamous moment on an aircraft carrier with mission accomplished, when it actually wasn't, and it was just, basically the beginning of another phase, as it turned out to be. I mean, I think at that time George W. Bush did think that quite a few things had been accomplished. But here in the case of Ukraine, it's clear that this is now becoming a really grinding, horrific, open-ended conflict.
If all that support, both military, economic and political, diplomatic, were to take place without NATO actually getting directly involved, can Ukraine win this war? And by that I mean, can they push Russia all the way back to the international borders?
It's going to be extraordinarily difficult to push Russia back to the international borders, and it's going to take, again, a combined effort. The other effort is to blunt the impact of Russia's military assault, to make it difficult for Russia itself to conduct the war. Basically starving Russia of the resources that it needs to keep this war going. That's why we're having so much debate about what happens with oil embargoes and gas embargoes, the continuous move towards sanctioning the Russian economy, making sure that other countries don't help Russia evade some of the sanctions, trying to keep critical components for the Russian military away from Russia, for example. There are many different dimensions to this, and it's not just about NATO. And in fact, I would stress again, it can't be just about NATO, because that feeds into the rhetoric, into the narrative framework of Putin. He wants this to look like this is all about NATO.
What keeps you up at night most? You've covered every aspect of this conflict. You've been, looking into the soul of Vladimir Putin and the soul of Russia for decades now. What keeps you up most at night?
I very much worry about us losing our own resolve, because we've got so many political uncertainties right now. You're in Paris covering the French election, for example. I mean, a surprise win for Marine Le Pen would change the dynamic really dramatically. We have in the United States coming up the 2022 midterms.
Question.
Well, there you are. You see, those things are basically rolled in together. We have the 2022 midterms in the United States, which could, very easily see a flip in the House, the House of Representatives. I think in Congress, actually, there's a lot of bipartisan support for Ukraine and for pushing back against Russia. But any of these political changes in Europe and in the United States, changes in the dynamic of our own relationships, could really weaken our own resolve. And of course, Putin is banking on that. He's banking on the fact that people won't be willing to put up with the pain of inflation, rising petrol prices or gas prices, depending on one's perspective, and that political changes will basically make it less likely that we're going to be unified. And that worries me. It does worry me as well.
Fiona Hill, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks so much, Matt.